Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. With us right now is former Neo-Nazi leader Jeff Schoep. He grew his organization, the National Socialist movement, into one of the largest Nazi movements in the United States. He's been involved for 27 years, and now he's working with the Jewish community. So welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Zev. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Now, you grew up in which part of the country?
I grew up in rural Minnesota.
And growing up, I would assume where you grew up, there weren't that many members of the Jewish community there.
Not that I was aware of, no.
And at a young age, you were fascinated by Nazis, and while you didn't join too much later on, but you were intrigued, and I believe you wanted to be a Nazi. You identify with the Nazi ideology.
Unfortunately, yes. My grandfather and great uncles had fought in the German army during World War II, so I had this fascination with that, knowing that family history growing up. And I do want to say, they didn't teach me about it or propagandize me into it or anything like that, but I was just fascinated with that part of the family history and looked into it as much as possible, and unfortunately got involved in that in the American Nazi movement.
And the American Nazi movement changed over the course of time. You had George Lincoln Rockwell in the 60s. You had the Aryan Nations. You had a whole group of groups, but you yet found yourself, and you changed and developed and actually built the National Socialist movement to be one of the largest, if not the largest, neo-Nazi group in the United States.
That's correct. Yeah. So I joined, I looked at all the different organizations around the time in the early 90s when I got involved, and I wanted to look for something that was connected to that history. And the National Socialist movement was run by people that had served with Rockwell, and it was a continuation of that movement. So that's why specifically that I got involved with that organization. And by the time I left in early 2019, it was the largest organization of its kind in the country. It's not anymore, I don't think, but it was at that time.
Now, I believe that reading Mein Kampf had a tremendous impact on you. Hitler's book that sort of helped shape your worldview, at least that point in time.
Well, that's what they say online, but they also say online I was reading that in the 4th grade, which isn't accurate. It's not even true. But I did start reading the Mein Kampf at about 16, and I was curious about it, and it was a hard book to read. It had all this. It was a slow read, I guess you could say. It was just not something that, but it did influence me. And indeed, that's correct.
Now, you didn't know any Jews, but you hated Jews, you hated blacks. So did you engage in any violence during the 27 years that you were part of the neo-Nazi movement against Jews or any other group?
No, in fact, you might be surprised. I think a lot of people would be surprised that a lot of the violence that I experienced actually over the years was sometimes within the group, sometimes with competing groups or other organizations, and a lot of times with a lot of the fighting was against the far left, Antifa groups and things like that as well on the far left aspect of things. So as far as any criminal activity goes, as far as targeting blacks or Jews or anything like that, I was never convicted of anything like that.
Interesting. You've probably more fights within the nationwide power movement than outside, because everybody was vying for leadership and power. You had a small group, but everybody wanted to be king.
Yeah, everybody wanted to be it's like what's the saying, a big fish in a small pond. There was a lot of that in the movement. So yeah, there was a lot of I think a lot of people from the outside looking in would be surprised about that, because they automatically think that these guys are off, just fighting their so-called enemies. But when you're in a group like that, everyone's the enemy. Like, you wake up every single day and you're like, the best way I can explain it is feeling like you're at war with the world, and you're just you're fighting everybody, the government, all the other races, half the white people or more, and then within your own in your own ideology as well. There's a lot of inner fighting and stuff like that. Yes,
I could imagine. So, how large is the neo-Nazi KKK? I'll lump them all together: the White Aryans, the White Power movement.
It's hard to put a number on that, but it's fluctuating all the time. I always felt like it was kind of a revolving door all the time. Like, the numbers would fluctuate, they'd go up and down and things like that. So it was very, very difficult to get a handle on how big it is. And then you don't know who's involved with all the other organizations and things like that. So it's really difficult to get a handle on, but it seems like it's always growing.
I would assume that in the age of the internet, that probably helped fuel the growth, because now you have neo-Nazis and haters are able to unite much easier on the internet, not just in the United States, but in England and Germany and around the world.
For sure. When I first joined in the 90s, you had to kind of seek out these groups. So it was more difficult to join. Now you just click a button and you can find this stuff anywhere on the internet. And unfortunately, and that has also help these organizations be able to connect with one another and make recruitment very easy in that sense.
Now, the media always likes to say that Donald Trump had some sort of impact on the white power movement. Is there any truth to that, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I disagree with that. I can say that in the organization that I was involved in, they didn't like Donald Trump. I didn't like Donald Trump when I was involved. He was, and I can share why, basically, because from the neo-Nazi perspective, Donald Trump was very close to Israel. He had done more for Israel than probably any other president, in a lot of the people's opinions. So it really depends, though. That varies from group to group. Some groups would say they really like Trump. Others would look at it as the lesser of two evils, where they would say, well, he's better than the Democrats, but typically the organization that I was in didn't care for Trump.
And you also had Orthodox Jewish children, a child and grandchildren. So I'm not sure if that would endear him to the Nazi Party, but always intrigued where the media always like to portray that, well, Donald Trump was in league with the neo-Nazi movement and the white power movement. But what you're saying, it's not true, but it's certainly a myth of the media.
It certainly fits a certain narrative. I'm very careful about how I place that label, but it doesn't fit certain narratives now, does it? But yeah, the group I was involved in had nothing to do with Trump and didn't care for Trump.
Now, you grew the movement. I guess one of the big spotlights on the neo-Nazi movement was the Charlottesville rally. Tell us about it, because you also got involved and you had some trouble relating to the Unite the Right rally that took place in 2017, which got a lot of national attention.
Well, see, the Charlottesville took place in 2017, and I did go there. I was involved in it, and I was later sued for my role in that event. But this was Charlottesville was around the time where I should have probably been leaving the organization around 2016, 2017, and I ended up staying until 2019, unfortunately. So, but yes, I was in Charlottesville.
And what really happened? Because the media likes to portray it in a certain way, where it seemed like they try to portray President Donald Trump as being in league or as being supportive. Did you deem that the president was being supportive of what you were doing in Charlottesville at the time?
No, if I recall, the statement that came out from President Trump after the rally was that there was good people on both sides and there was bad people on both sides, and I felt like I remember hearing that on the news when he said it, and I just felt like, well, that sounds kind of accurate. There was bad people on both sides and good people on both sides, and I didn't really think anything of it, but at the time. But as you and I both know, that's been portrayed in a different manner.
Certainly has. Now, growing up, did you hear anything about Jews from your family, from friends? Did people talk about Jews in any kind of way, derogatory or not?
I would say not really. You know, where I grew up in rural Minnesota, it was all white people mostly in the area, and it wasn't something that came up in our household. It just wasn't discussed. And I could say that, you know, I wasn't raised to hate. I wasn't brought up to be an anti-Semite or anything like that. And it wasn't even when I joined the movement. At that point, I don't think I was an anti-Semite. The hate and the anti-Semitism and all that sort of thing, that came with the indoctrination. That came after one got involved. And it's not like that for everybody, but for a lot of people it is. You know, they think they're joining this movement and they're going to do something positive and noble, and they want to fight for their people. And then all of a sudden, it's nothing like that. You're dehumanizing other human beings, and you're hating everybody, and it's not a good thing to be involved in.
But so then why would you want to join a movement? What attracted you if you weren't a hater of Jews? And I assume you couldn't tell me you weren't a hater of blacks or minorities. So then what drew you to join such a movement?
Well, like I said, for me, it was that family, it was that historical connection that I thought was interesting. But what it really amounts to is that getting involved in something like this, I felt like, and I can speak for myself, but a lot of the people that are getting involved, they think that they're defending their people, they're defending their country. I would say things like, I'm doing this for my people, I'm going to save the white race, you know. That's basically the narrative. I think a lot of times when people are looking from the outside looking in, they're thinking, well, people are joining this because they hate everybody, and that's typically not how it's happening. Hate is a byproduct of it. It's like the movement's a cancer, and hate is one of those byproducts of that cancer. It comes later. You're taught to hate once you're involved. That a lot of hate is based on fear, and the fear is what drives a lot of people in there. Fear the white people are going to be replaced. Fear, you know, all these terrible things are going to happen, and then you're standing up and you're fighting for your people. So you think in your mind you're doing something good. It's much like being in a cult where you think you have this great knowledge and you're going to be doing these great things, but really it's not.
We're speaking with Jeffrey Schoep, former neo-Nazi leader, head of the National Socialist movement. He was the head of that organization, one of the largest neo-Nazi organization in the United States. How did your family take to the fact that you were a neo-Nazi?
It was a great source of shame for my family. It was, you know, we all know how hate and being involved in this sort of thing affects society, but a lot of people don't realize, I don't think, what it does. Those are involved in it, it's toxic as well, but what it does to the families quite often is something you don't hear about a lot. And I can tell you it affected my family greatly. You know, my family received threats, you know, because of my involvement. My mother's career was destroyed because of my involvement. She was an attorney and was elected to be a judge in the state of Minnesota, and which was her dream. That's what she wanted to do. And there was a formality, the way it was explained to me, that the governor of the state of Minnesota back in the 90s, they would have to sign off on all the new judges. And the way my mother explained it to me at the time was that the governor had called her up and said, Mrs. Schoep, your father fought in the German army during World War II. Your son's a leader in the Nazi party. We don't feel like you're fit to be a judge in this state. And you know, that devastated my mom. She was actually a liberal Democrat, you know, so it really stung for her. And that's something that unfortunately she passed away before she got to see the change and the work that I'm doing now. So
what about your father?
He's been very, very supportive of the work that I'm doing now and everything, but you know, it hit him hard as well when I was involved. You know, he ran his own business. He ran a manufacturing company, and his business wasn't affected as much as my mother's.
And you have siblings as well?
Yes.
And again, were they supportive of your being a neo-Nazi, or they were also on the outs with you over that?
Nobody in the family was supportive of it. It was very very toxic to the entire family. So basically, the way my family handled it was, we won't talk politics. We can keep the family together, hold the family together, but let's not talk politics. So that's the only reason that I was still in their sphere of at all, basically, is that we didn't discuss that. A lot of the people that were involved in it, their families would cut them off completely, or vice versa, they would cut their families off, because the movement, when you're involved in something like that, it becomes like your family. They're your brothers and sisters. They're your just like a cult. You cut yourself off, or your families cut you off quite often. So I was very fortunate in that sense, where my family did not completely ostracize me.
Now, you mentioned like a family, but give us a profile of somebody who would join, let's say, your movement or any other neo-Nazi movement. The images is a lot of people who are loners, don't really have lots of family or friends, looking to make a name for themselves, and by hating other people, it elevates them to where they feel important.
So it's really hard to put it into a box like that. I mean, you do have that element. You do have those people, the people that are very lonely or ostracized in that sense, are more susceptible, certainly more susceptible to it. And I can say that from all the years that I was there, because I would want to know why people were joining, what their reasons were. It's an ultra paranoid environment, because you're always worried that you're being infiltrated by law enforcement and different organizations. And of course, that was
Did you find people who infiltrated you? Were you able to pick those people out?
Constantly.
What gave them away?
Early on, what gave those people away was, they would come and they would suggest doing illegal activities, like blowing things up or going and shooting people or things like that. Other times it was, some of these are really long stories, but I'll try to condense them the best I can. But other times, in the early years, there was a lot of that, where they would try to get you involved in illegal activities, entrapment, things like that. Later on, it was more just, I think, to monitor. So there was ones that we found out that were involved, sometimes recording phone calls, sometimes different operations like that. But I think they were there just to kind of keep an eye on things or catalog things. But I think your audience will find this one interesting. As you know, now I do work with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and when I had first met individual that I work with, a colleague there, Rick Eaton, who was their I always forget his title, but he's like the chief researcher. He's been there 35 years. So he had come out and met with me in Detroit after I had left the movement. And at the end of our meeting, I said, well, Rick, it was really nice meeting you. And he says, Jeff, we've met before. And I says, no, I don't think so. He goes, yeah, we have. And I says, no, we haven't. So we're going back and forth. And he says, yes, we have. And then he rattled off a place and a time and a date, and it was a small meeting that I was speaking at in a town in rural Minnesota, and he was there undercover, and so he goes, so yes, we met there, and I was just like, oh my gosh. So that's a fun story to tell now, but yeah, so there was always undercover.
Okay. Now, so how did you go? You're 27 years in the movement. So what happened where all of a sudden you decided, I'm not going to lead this? Listen, you were a leader of the largest neo-Nazi movement in the United States, National Socialist movement. What made you change to decide not only where you left the movement, but you're also working with the Simon Wiesenthal Center?
Right. It was having interpersonal relationships, meeting people that I vilified the most over those years. There's so many, it's such a long story, and there's so many different aspects of it, but I should have probably left the movement in 2016 or 2017. And then I kept making excuses to stay. And
were you having doubts at that time?
Oh, yes. I was having a lot of doubts. So what happened first was, it was on 2016, and I had met an African-American by the name of Daryl Davis. And I agreed to be one of one of the roles that I had when I was running the NSM was to meet with different filmmakers and news crews and different things like that, and to get the word out for the organization. So I had met with Daryl Davis for his film. I didn't even know it was Daryl. I just agreed to be part of this film, and I had met with him, and he was sitting across from me, and he had explained to me what racism had done, how it affected him as a child, and how that made him feel. And he talked about being 12 years old in the Boy Scout parade and being pelted with rocks by white adults because he was the only African American in the Boy Scout parade. And it didn't sit right. It did not sit right with me. It didn't feel right.
Why isn't that what you were for 27 years or 25 years, and what you were talking about, the inferiority of the blacks, of Jews? So members, if you didn't practice violence, certainly members of your organization, the ideology, preach violence and engage in violence from time to time.
Well, there's a lot of disconnects. There's a lot of disconnects because I convinced myself, and a lot of the people that are involved in it, is that this isn't a hate group. We're not preaching hate. We're just preaching love of the white race. So this is like, it's a psychological disconnect. And then all of a sudden you're sitting across from somebody, and you're hearing about how this affected them personally. It's very, interpersonal story. It's like, wait a minute, here I think I'm doing this great thing. I'm fighting for my kids. I'm fighting for my future, but this is how it's making someone feel. And I just, tried to put that out of my head at the time and just keep moving forward. And about 6 months later, I had met another filmmaker by the name of Dia Khan, and she was a Muslim lady. And I'd gotten to know her quite well over the course of the filming and spent a good amount of time with her because she was one of the main characters in her film. And I considered her a friend. She was like family to me. And a very similar story. She says, look, Jeff, the ideology that you're involved in, the things that you're involved in, made a little girl feel hated, less than, not worthy, ugly. And I felt like I got kicked in the chest by a horse. It did not sit right with me. And that was
Did it right with your colleagues in the National Socialist movement that you have friends that are black? Didn't they also accuse you of having a wife who was mixed race? So
yeah,
were you were they undergoing suspicions of who you are?
Well, there's rumors and things like that were going on and during that period of time. But I know when Dia's film came out, there was a few people, because I was the leader, very few people criticized me within the group. People outside of the group would criticize, but in the group, you didn't get a lot of that. But the few people in the upper ranks, people that had been with me for years and years and years, when Dia's film came out, they were like, sir, you look soft in that. Like, she got to you. You look soft, and so that was about as critical as they got. But
so in other words, that you weren't espousing anti-black white ideology, you were softened it in the movie?
I was too soft. Yeah. Like that you could see it. You could see it in the film. If you watch it, it's called White Right Meeting the Enemy. And the cameraman caught it because when she's having that conversation with me and she's talking about how it made her feel, he zoomed in on my eyes and you can see it in my eyes that it didn't sit right with me. But again, this was in 2017. I'm still making excuses. I've convinced myself that it's a white civil rights organization, that I'm demanding that to be called that in the press and within the organization. And eventually what I was trying to do, Zev, was I was trying to put lipstick on a pig, and the pig being the Nazi party, and I had convinced.
And how large a movement was the National Socialist movement under your leadership?
I'm sorry, what?
How large of a membership did you have at your helm?
It was always fluctuating, so it was very difficult to keep track of as far as the numbers. Over the years, it was thousands of people, but at any given time, it might have been. It's tough to say. Hundreds at any given time, but thousands and thousands over the years.
And you had to fundraise too. How'd you do in the fundraising department? You had to raise money to keep the organization going too.
Yeah, so there was membership dues. People would make donations and things like that. And I ran for work, I ran a record label. So this was another thing that I was selling neo-Nazi music and things like that. So that was another reason. And it's not a reason, it's not a good reason, but it was one of the things that when I should have left sooner, I felt like, well, this is all I did. This is all I did my whole adult life. I'm stuck. What can I do? So I was trying to change it from within and put that lipstick on the pig and convince myself and everybody else that it was a white civil rights movement, and you can't do it. And so eventually, I broke free of it, and I just said, you know what, it doesn't matter if the world accepts me or not, but I have to leave this. I can't be part of this anymore. My conscience wouldn't allow it.
Jeff Schoep is our guest. He once led the National Socialist movement, one of the largest, most active neo-Nazi groups in the United States, and been there in the white supremacist movement for 27 years. Now he's working with the Simon Wiesenthal Center. So here you are, 2017, you're having doubts, you leave around 2019, you're there for Charlottesville. You had trouble with the law, didn't you?
What do you mean?
With the law, didn't you have lawsuits? Didn't you have, were you ever arrested for any of your activities? But I know you were sued at that point in time too, weren't you?
Yeah, I was sued. I was sued for being in Charlottesville. So that case was still going. That case was going on, and actually, I may have left in 2017, but then the court case came, and then I felt like, well, maybe I should stick it out and keep fighting this in the court. But I ended up leaving during the lawsuit. But no, I didn't get in any criminal.
Were you ever arrested as part of your activities?
No, not. I mean, I'm trying to think. No, I don't think so.
I guess the other neo-Nazis used to call you Hollywood Nazis, right?
Yeah.
Nickname that you had. They felt that your group was too soft. Is that what they were alluding to?
The Hollywood Nazis comment came from some of the other groups that were criticized the NSM. They didn't like the old uniforms that were the NSM wore from the old days up until 2006, I think it was. So they didn't like that. And then the doing demonstrations and things like that. So NSM is as ugly as an organization as it was, and explicitly Nazi or National Socialist. It typically stayed within the lines of legality, not because it was a great moral construct. I'd love to tell you that it was, but it was, so people didn't go to jail and prison. But of course, there was members that went to jail and prison for different things over the years. But as an organization, it was legal.
So here you are, 2017. You're thinking of leaving. 2009, you leave. So how did you hook up? Again, I started asking this before. So how did you get connected to the Simon Wiesenthal Center, where you're still working with them today?
So yeah, in 2019, when I first left the movement, at first in March, what I did was retired, and
did they give you a pension?
Yeah, right. I wish, right? No, I'm kidding. But I retired for a tactical reason. I knew I was going to speak out, Zev, but I also knew that the moment I started speaking out, that the threats and all that would start rolling in. So I retired because I needed to process everything, and it took a little bit of time. And about 6 months later, then I said I launched a website I think it was in August of 2019, and basically said that I was going to work in peace building. I was going to speak out against hate and racism. And immediately when that website went up, within a couple of days, I was contacted by the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and Rick Eaton, who I mentioned from the center, came out to Detroit and met with me and said, well, what do you want to do and what's going on, and basically vetted me, and I've been working closely with the Wiesenthal Center ever since.
How did your former colleagues and some of your people who worked for you with the National Socialist movement, how they take to the fact that not only did you leave, but you're working with the enemy, the Jews, the Simon Wiesenthal Center?
Yeah. Not so well, as you can imagine. I mean, like I said, as soon as I started speaking out against racism and hate, I started getting some threats and things like that. A lot of the people were it's tough. You know, a lot of them are anonymous when they're doing that, you know, so it's not like I could say, oh, well, that guy that I knew, you know, there was a couple that I knew that were making threats, but most of them were coming in like voicemails from blocked numbers, emails from anonymous emails, things like that. So it wasn't well received.
Right, I can imagine it wasn't well received, but nobody tried beating you up. It was more just phone calls, emails attacking you.
Well, it's not in their best interest to try to beat me up.
Okay, well, listen, you're dealing with a violent group, and I know for a while there was an extreme Nazi movement. They even killed a Jewish talk show host by the name of Berg. Was it the I forgot the name of the neo-Nazi group. So you're talking about people who, some of them are very prone to violent activities.
Yeah. The group you're talking about is the Silent Brotherhood, or the Order, the
Order.
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Well, of course, there's risk involved in things like that, in what I do, especially in speaking out. And all of us that do speak out, we know that, we accept that, and of course, you know, there could be the potential for violence, and I expected that. You know, I was involved in an extreme organization for a lot of years, and it was dangerous there too. So on this side of things, it's dangerous as well. I mean, you know, if whatever comes, that's the way I look at it. You know, I'm not going to live my life in fear. I'd rather, you know, stand like a lion and face what's coming.
Now, when you were leader of the NSM, the National Socialist Movement, talk about the connectivity between the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, and other Nazi groups. And I believe there was also some rallies where everybody gets together. Talk about, I know there's rivalry, but let's talk about the fact that they united on certain activities and events.
Yeah, so I did have a pivotal role in some of that stuff over the years. I helped to form an organization, or not really an organization, but a coalition, I guess you could say, of organizations called the Nationalist Front, which would bring these organizations together to work together. But again, even amongst these type of groups, they'll bicker and fight amongst themselves. It could be over religion, it could be over politics, it could be over power, a woman, I mean, you name it. It could be over just about anything. And it's really particularly extreme when you deal with groups like the Klan, because you'll have splinter groups of the Klan that are run by one person calling themselves an Imperial Wizard or a Grand Dragon and different things like that. So there was a lot of that, but for different things, trying to bring people together and unite these groups over the years, it was something that I was pretty heavily involved in, is trying to get people to work together. And sometimes that would happen, and groups would come together for different things, but just as quite often it was, they would come together in the public eye, or they would come together for events and things like that, but then go back to bickering and arguing later.
Out of curiosity, whatever happened to David Duke? He was the face of he was supposed to be the more genteel face of the white nationalist movement. Whatever happened to him?
He's still around. He was in Charlottesville.
Oh, he's in trouble, but you don't hear it, man. I know he ran, didn't he? I believe he ran for president. He certainly had a high profile, but I would say in the last decade or so, probably had much less so.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I met him, you know, once or twice, but was not really working closely with him.
Are you speaking to a lot of Jewish groups
today or
Yeah.
now? Yeah, yes, absolutely. I'm doing a lot of good work with the Wiesenthal Center. To me, it's absolutely phenomenal to work with the Jewish community, because especially considering it was the people that I vilified the most, and the acceptance and the kindness, and it's almost like, the best way I can explain it, Zev, is like when you're a kid and you go into school and it's opposite day and you switch your shirt backwards and all that. That was my life. Like, I feel like that was my life when the first time I'd ever went to a synagogue was in Skokie in Chicago. I thought, man, and I was going to tell my story about my family and all that. And I thought, you know, I don't know how the people are going to accept me, if they're going to accept me. I mean, are they going to drag me out of here, you know, and you know, rightfully so, probably. I didn't know what to expect. And the outpouring of compassion and love and kindness was something it still raises the hair up on the back of my neck when I think about it, because we certainly didn't deserve that kindness. And everything that I've learned about the Jewish community was almost the opposite of what I thought I knew. So I think it's a real lesson in that sense.
You mentioned that you vilified the Jews. Was it literature did you publish a lot of hate material against Jews?
Yeah, well, rallies, literature, promoting music, all this kind of stuff. And it was just hate propaganda, and in the movement, especially in the movement that I was involved in, the Jews were blamed for everything. Like the running joke is like you could not spill a glass of water and somebody say, "Oh, that's the Jews." Obviously it wasn't quite that ridiculous, but pretty close. I mean, the Jews were blamed for everything. If they say, well, there was high crime in an area, well, it's because the Jews bust the blacks into the area, and that's why the blacks were committing crimes. It was just, it was the Jews were blamed for everything. It was crazy.
And you didn't grow up with, but that became used to it as part of the movement. So you engaged printed literature. The rallies were viciously anti-Jewish. Charlottesville certainly was, the Jews will not replace us, right? That was the slogan. There's also a whole movement. Also, the Turner Diary was a big thing. Was that during your day as well, the Turner Diaries?
Yeah, that came out in, oh man, I'm not sure what year it came out, but I remember it as long as I was involved, the Turner Diaries was a pretty popular book. I mean, I think it came out in, I hate to even guess.
Like the neo-Nazis, right? The Zogs, the Zion Occupational Government.
Yeah, and it was very violent. They would talk about hanging people from the lampposts, and it was a fantasy novel. What they basically written by William Pierce under a pseudonym, and basically a fantasy novel about what they thought might happen if the United States breaks into a race war or civil war.
Now, as part of the NSM, did you ever have any support from local elected officials or congressmen and senators? Did they ever have where they gave you a wink and say, we support you, but I can't publicly do so? Did you ever come across that?
Not really. There was a few people that we had that ran for office, political office and things like that, but they were running as known NSM candidates. So there wasn't a lot of public officials that had anything to do with it. Typically, the people involved were working class. In later years, a lot more middle class were coming in. But and I think I didn't answer that question earlier, but as far as like what type of person joins this, there's people from all different backgrounds. It wasn't just people that fit a certain single parent household, abuse, all these type of things. Those can all be factors, but literally anybody could be involved in or recruited into something like this. It didn't have to be, just somebody that was poorly educated. There was people in there that were educated as well, unfortunately.
Well, that's a stereotype. It's low education, misfit, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't fit in society, loner. So they're going to join a group like the neo-Nazis or KKK. But the truth is it's going to always be a mixture. And
yeah.
You yourself are proof because you built the movement. So you certainly had the ability and the knowledge and able to take a group and make it the largest neo-Nazi movement in the United States.
Unfortunately. Yeah. So I have a lot of work to do to dismantle that and work against it now. So
before I let you go, so what do you like most about Jews and Judaism?
What do I like most? Oh,
yeah, in other words, you've been exposed to it, so obviously all your conceptions go out the window. So what intrigues you? What do you like the most? What you see, whether Jewish life, Jewish culture, etc., or Jewish religion?
I've learned so much. I like tikkun olam, to repair the world, and some of the things that I've heard from people after talks and learned from, and I can tell you when I go to Chicago, I stay with the Orthodox Jewish woman at her home, and I've learned so much being there during Shabbat. I enjoy that because then everything's off and you're not on your phones and all that kind of stuff. And I just learned so much. Everything I thought I knew was it's really the opposite. So it's been pretty incredible for me, and I've met so many wonderful people. I don't know if I can pick just one thing.
Have you ever considered converting to Judaism?
I don't know about that. I always tease my Jewish friends, Zev, and I say being a Jew is a lot of work. You have a lot of rules and with all these different things. So I don't know. I might not be cut out for that.
Final question: what's your favorite Jewish food?
Oh man,
I ask every elected official that question. By the way,
what's that?
I ask every elected official. When I do the mayor or a senator, I always ask them that question.
That's hard to guess. That's a tough one. There's so many different that are good. So I don't know. I can't answer that one.
Jeffrey Schoep, he once led the National Socialist movement. He made it to one of the largest neo-Nazi groups in the United States. He's currently working with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, has gone through a life change to make a difference. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to
Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.